or not has nothing to do with this verse. This has to do with the remnant of Israel. They're saying he died. We esteemed him stricken of God. Yet he died bearing our griefs, bearing our sorrows. Well, and it speaks of how they look upon him whom they've pierced. You know, we pierced him, but he did it for our sakes. And he's not speaking of everyone in the world. He's not speaking of Jews and Gentiles. All he's speaking of here is that remnant of Israel who's going to be standing before their Messiah thinking, we crucified our King. We crucified the one who came to deliver us. Right? That's all. This is all this chapter is describing. And in verse 12, where the Calvinists would say that he bare the sin of many, and they say, well, see, he didn't bear the sin of all, he bare the sin of many. And they say, well, it's limited atonement. It has nothing to do with limited atonement or universal atonement. It has to do with the nation of Israel entering into the promise of the new covenant, where they've come face to face with the King of their nation, whom they've pierced. And it's their astonishment. It has nothing to do with the Gentiles. Now we're going to receive many blessings from this, because remember the covenant that God made with Abraham, when he said, you know, he made a covenant with Abraham that out of his seed the nations would be blessed. And Paul brings that out in Romans. And we're going to, well, not we, the church, but the Gentile nations are going to enjoy blessings because of this. But it has nothing to do with the atonement of the Gentiles. It has nothing to do with Christ's work on our behalf. It's just Jesus and the Jewish nation here that's spoken of in Isaiah 53. And another one here that's... And I was just thinking about this yesterday because I heard it on the radio, or Friday, heard it on the radio of a preacher over in Dartmouth. He said, you know, if you're laying in bed and you're sick, he said, kick off the blankets, he said, because with his stripes we are healed. So he's speaking of physical healing for us, but it has nothing to do with that. Whether Christ
heals you or not.
That's right.
It's not based on this verse.
It can't base that on this verse.
Yeah.
Because this is the nation of Israel, and personally I think this has to do with national healing. But even if it is individual physical healing, and I think it's national and spiritual healing, but even if it's physical and individual healing, then it still has to do with the Jews in the millennial kingdom, that 1,000-year kingdom. And I think you can, if that's what it is, you can see that supported in other passages where we see during the millennial kingdom that there's going to be a return to long life. And it may have something to do with that. But what it doesn't have to do with is whether Christians get sick or not, or whether Christians can claim, and you see this so often. I know one gentleman who's taking pills for some chemical imbalances and for depression and so on and so forth. You know, he's taking these pills, but the whole time he's taking the pills, you know, by his stripes I've been healed. You know, I'm not sick, but I have to take these pills. Or I have a broken leg, you know, and limping around, but by his stripes I've been healed. It has nothing to do with that. And that's the thing. Because if it did, we have a lot of contradicting.
Right. What I see
passages.
In that, what you're describing there is, they're placing their faith in, if I claim this verse,
Right.
then and the focus tends to be on claiming the verse rather than on Christ, right?
Exactly.
And it's like, Christ is more than able to heal.
Yep.
But it's not because I claim this verse
Exactly.
that he's able to heal. It's because Christ is Christ.
That's right.
That he is our healer.
Yeah. And the problem with taking this verse though too out of this context and telling people to claim this verse, what ends up happening so often is people are sick and they have, let's say, and I've seen this, people, sick with severe diseases, cancer and such, and they think that there's something wrong with them because they're not being healed. Well, if Christ bore my illness, my diseases, well, why aren't I healed? And so it must be because I am deficient in some manner. And then there's guilt, but it all stems back to taking a verse out of context.
And that all goes back then, that all leads the person down a performance road,
Exactly.
which is not, that's not God either.
No, no. And you see that in cases like this, if you're not being healed, there's something wrong with you. There's
You don't have enough faith, or.
yeah, you don't have enough faith. You see it in other, and I've actually seen one gentleman who goes to a church out in here in the city, and he was actually told that unless he gains more faith, that he might not be raptured at the first round of the raptures.
Oh my goodness.
And that, so because there's a a partial rapture theory and such, and because he didn't have enough faith, and he was told that in connection with a preacher who claims to grow back limbs. But he always does it in this back room. So this gentleman there, he was one of my customers, Carol Pontiac, he would come in. He came in there one time and he asked me, he said, well, I keep going to the pastor and asking him, why won't he let me in the back room to watch the finger being put back on or whatever, right? And they used to tell me he didn't have enough faith, and that if he didn't grow in faith, he might miss the rapture. And this is the same guy that has the problems with depression and everything else. So you can just imagine how taking a verse out of context can really affect some people.
Yeah.
Right? And such. So
And we're not saying that God doesn't heal, because
Exactly.
He does. He heals dramatically, fantastically, according to His will, kind of thing,
that's
right?
right. According, yeah. But it's not something. But see, if it's something that's connected with the work of Christ. For instance, propitiation. If propitiation, the satisfying of God, like God's righteousness demanded a righteous verdict. The soul that sins shall surely die. Right? Well, Christ satisfied God's righteousness. God was offended by sin. Christ died as His propitiation, His satisfaction. His satisfaction. Now, if God isn't completely satisfied, then Christ failed at His work of propitiation. Now, if we say that Christ, because of His work on the cross, has healed every one of our illnesses, because He bore every one of them, then we yet have illnesses, well, then there's deficiency on Christ's work. But if that's not the case, because that's not, He heals in individual cases according to His will, but not according to a one-time work that He accomplished. Therefore, we just never get sick, because Christ is that great, and His power is that great. If He died that we never bearing all of our illnesses, then we would never experience illness. He did it. That we will never experience the wrath of God, because Christ completely satisfied God's wrath and such. So His work was complete. Right? So we have the keeping it in the context. We went to Isaiah 53. So keeping that in context with the passage in general, we see that it has to do with Israel. And the same with the book. All of the Old Testament books deal with Israel. There's nothing, or humanity in general. When we start in Genesis and we go through to the beginning of the life of Abraham, that's just mankind. God created man. Mankind rebelled and failed. God judged mankind in the flood and such. But in the nation, when He began in the life of Abraham, that's the beginning of His work with the Jewish nation. And all of the Old Testament deals with the Jewish nation. There's nothing there of the church. Paul said that the church is a mystery, hid in God, not revealed in other ages. And Paul said of himself that he was given the administration of the mystery of God. It was given to Paul to reveal that mystery that was hid in God in the times past, right? And such. So all of Isaiah deals with the people of Israel, and that's why there's a saying that all of the Bible is written for us, but not all of it was written to us or about us, right? All Scripture is for our learning, but not all of it's about us, right? And we have, as Gentiles, a very small part in God's work.